Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Indigo Women Podcast / live stream. I'm your host, Natalie. I am the creator of Indigo Women, and I'm so excited that you are here. So thank you so much for tuning in. Indigo stands for Intentional Network of Divinely and Intuitively Guided Old Souls. And as of today, we have 18 YouTube subscribers and over 300 women in our Facebook community. So we're still small, but we are mighty, and we would love it if you have not already subscribed on YouTube or joined our Facebook group. If you would love to join our community, we would really, really appreciate it. So a little bit about me before we get started with this episode. My work involves guiding and mentoring soul-centered powerhouse women to release limiting beliefs, step into higher self-consciousness, claim their wholeness, and live life in a state of flow. So the work that I do isn't really about teaching new things. It's about guiding you to remember your true nature so that you can really connect to your own inner wisdom and inner knowing. There's so much that you already know, and I am just here to help you remember. So we're all about cultivating that intuition, that inner compass, and also that connection with source energy. We are very, very much into the idea that all of us are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that's really going to come through in today's podcast episode. So today's podcast episode is called For the Love of Bodies. And this idea came to me last week to have an episode on this topic. And I was also a little nervous and apprehensive to talk on the idea of our relationship as women with our own bodies. I myself had a very tumultuous relationship with my body in the past. Fortunately, I have learned to love my body and everything that it represents and everything that it allows me to do. And I felt really called to share my journey with you all in the hopes that it might help you if you are someone who also has had, either in the past or currently, a tumultuous relationship with your own body. So we're going to look at the concept of a human body through a spiritual lens. And I'm also going to share my own personal perception of how we can cultivate a better relationship with this beautiful sacred vessel that we've been gifted with throughout our human experience. So I have to start this episode, of course, with a disclaimer and a little bit of a trigger warning. We are going to talk about disordered eating, also SA, and I just want to clarify that I am not a clinical mental health professional. I'm simply someone who is sharing their own personal experiences. So please take all that I say in this episode with a grain of salt and take what serves you, leave the rest. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. I do feel as though this is a pretty vulnerable episode for me, as eating disordered patterns is something that I dealt with from about the age of 16 to the age of 27. Really crazy that it took such a huge portion of my life, but I know that this is extremely common. I would argue that the vast majority of women have had, at one point in their lives, issues with their body perception. Maybe you're someone who currently struggles with this, or maybe this is something that you've struggled with in the past, or maybe you've never struggled with it, but you know women who have. Every single one of us knows at least one woman who has struggled with their body perception. And I think that there's a million different reasons for this. This is also a discussion that I'm sure we could have for hours and hours and hours. And this is also a topic that would be really cool to be visited in a group discussion. But obviously, for the sake of this podcast episode / live stream, I am having a conversation with myself. So with that said, I would love to hear your comments, your insights, and your feedback in the comments, whether you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube or some other streaming service. I want to hear what you have to say about this, because this is a really, really deep topic. It has many, many layers. Our perception of our bodies are born of so many different influences. And nobody's story is going to be the same. So the things that influence your body perception are going to be really different from the things that influence my body perception. So it's important to recognize that. And it's also important to recognize that this particular discussion deserves way more than just the 30 or 40 minutes that I'm about to give it. But I am talking to myself on a camera, and this is all I've got. Please feel free to interact with me and tell me what your thoughts are on this topic. So with that said, I would like to share my perception on what a body is from a spiritual perspective. So in my mind, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. This is a core principle of the Indigo Women. As I said, Indigo is an intentional network of divinely and intuitively guided old souls. We recognize that there is a specific divinity that is within us that guides us. We feel as though our existence goes way beyond whatever's going on in our physical bodies. You may disagree with this, and that's completely okay. But in regards to my own personal belief system, I truly believe in my heart and in my soul that we have a soul, and that our soul knows that we are connected to source energy. So through that spiritual lens, what is a body? What is the point of a body? I believe that our souls have chosen to have a human experience. And in having a human experience, we have committed to living in a human body, the same human body, throughout the duration of that entire experience. And it takes me back to that Albert Einstein quote where he says, "All of life is illusion, albeit a persistent one." And I feel that our bodies are probably the most persistent illusion that we have as long as we are in this form. Every night, we go to bed in our body. Every day, we wake up in that same body. The way that we perceive our body might change. Our bodies are going to grow, they're going to fluctuate, they're going to do their whole thing that they do. So the body itself is going to change, but at the end of the day, we don't leave our bodies unless potentially mentally we do, or if we're astral projecting, or if we're dissociating. But in general, we stay within our own bodies during the duration of our human experience. What else that we've talked about in the past, pop quiz, what else is assigned to us at the time of committing to a human experience? Our ego. Yes, good job. What is the function of the ego? The ego's main function is to help us to survive. How do we survive? We survive by staying within our bodies. There is a very strong connection between the ego and the body, and I would really like to encourage you to think of both of these things as neutral entities that simply help us remain committed to the human experience. If we did not have a body, there would be no place for our soul to commit to physically for us to be able to experience this whole physical thing that we're doing. If we did not have an ego, we would very likely be unable to protect ourselves from the forces of nature that can be found within this physical existence. Our ego is very intimately connected to our mind, and our subconscious mind is primarily designed to keep the body intact, okay? Also, the physical component of ourselves from an energetic perspective is considered one of the lowest vibrational frequencies that we carry. Now, again, disclaimer, I am not a physicist, and please do not take the words that I use in regards to energy, vibration, frequency to actually mean that in a scientific sense. I use those words as descriptions of how it feels. So when I say it is the lowest vibrational frequency that we have is our physical body, what I mean is that it is the most tangible part of us. It is the most solid part of us. It is the heaviest part of us. And it's also the most consistent part of us. Our bodies are always there in the same way that our egos are always there. And we're always going to be interacting with our egos as long as we are having a human experience. Can you transcend the ego? Absolutely, you can. How do you transcend the ego? You transcend the ego by making friends with it. How do we learn to love our bodies? By figuring out how to make friends with our bodies. It's all very intimately connected, in my opinion, and in my personal experience. So when I look at a body from a spiritual lens, I see it as the opportunity, as the vessel for this little soul seed that I have to be able to experience life as a human. And as we've talked about in past podcast episodes, it's my belief that the reason why we want to become humans in the first place is so that we can experience the highs and lows of being these emotional, volatile, all over the place creatures that have the opportunity to forget their sacred nature so that they can experience the joy of remembering. What does a body do? It gives us the opportunity to forget our higher selves so that we can experience the joy of remembering, the joy of returning, the joy of going back into that flow state once we remember. So let's talk about my personal experience with my relationship with my body, because perhaps it will also resonate with yours. Starting from the time of 16, I started to build up trauma. But honestly, I think that it happened way before that, because I grew up in a society, and so did you, most likely, that is a very fat shaming society. I grew up in the 90s, which is a very similar dynamic of the 60s, in which that heroin chic, very, very, very thin sort of fashion model, if you remember Jennifer Aniston in Friends and the skinniness that was, there was a massive emphasis on being as thin as humanly possible if you were a woman in the 90s, in the culture that I grew up. And I could have grown up in the most body positive household and still been influenced by that societal message that you are only valuable if you can take up the least amount of space possible. Now, I'm not going to get into how deeply psychologically ridiculous that is in regards to the patriarchal dynamic. Not going there today. We can visit that on another time. But it is important to note that there is a very strong, very persistent underlying message to women in our society that value comes from the way that we look, the body that we carry, the meat suit that we're walking around in. Newsflash, it is not your value. But unfortunately, it's so deeply ingrained that many, many, many women, either subconsciously or consciously, believe that message and take it upon themselves. That message in itself can be very traumatizing to our psyche, because once we believe that our value is reliant on our physical form, then every little comment, every little interaction, every little bit of shame or shade that gets thrown our way is going to stick. I have so many memories of just tiny little one-liners that people said in passing about my body from 15 years ago that have stuck with me to this day. If you fully subscribe to this cultural obsession with body image, those little bits and pieces that are thrown around, whether intentionally or not, are going to stick. And unfortunately, it accumulates over time. So the interesting thing about our egos, in my opinion, and in my understanding, is that our egos accumulate painful experiences in an attempt to protect us from painful experiences in the future. Now, in some regards, that's a really positive thing. If you're walking through the woods and you get chased by a lion, it's a really good idea that you avoid that part of the woods in the future. However, this mechanism can definitely be taken a little too far in our current day and age, where we're not exactly getting chased by lions on a daily basis, where if someone says something to us negative about our bodies, we can start to energetically close off. Or we can take that comment and self-inflict. We can take that comment and harm ourselves with it by repeating it in our heads over and over and over. And we can start to create a collection of these comments. The more and more that we collect these comments, and they might come to us directly, but it could also be general. There could also even just be this commercial that features someone with a woman with a body type that's different from yours. And that can be triggering in itself. There's so many things that we can accumulate. And as we accumulate, we're telling ourselves over and over again that our bodies are wrong. Now, this doesn't just come from cultural influences. We can also accumulate a million different types of trauma. In my personal experience, I have also accumulated religious trauma and also SA. And those types of traumas directly affected my perception of my personal worth and my personal value. When I experienced the religious trauma of not feeling good enough for God, go ahead and go back to episode 1 if you want to hear that story, I started to add that to the pile of cultural conditioning that was happening in regards to my body. Okay, so all of these influences from the media and from advertisements and from the general conversation of diet culture, that added to my feelings of unworthiness. And then when I experienced religious trauma, that added to my experience of unworthiness. And then when I experienced SA, that added to the pile of unworthiness. So my ego was having a heyday. And where do you think I put all of that energy? I put all of that energy into really disliking my physical form. Why? Because my ego was so wounded. And if your ego is wounded from all of the trauma, if you've accumulated all of this energetic yuck from all these different outside sources, and you continually perpetuate it within your own narrative, where's all that energy going to go? Well, it's going to go into the lowest vibrational frequency of you. And it'll go other places as well. But for the sake of this particular episode, let's talk about the thing. Let's talk about the body, the ego, and the accumulation of trauma, and how this can create a really unfortunate and dense perpetual cycle of inner criticism. The more time that you spend, the more time that I spent on all of these obsessive and compulsive behaviors regarding my body, the more I ended up fueling the density of the trauma within my system. So for example, and once again, eating disorder trigger. So fast forward if you don't want to hear about it. But when this cycle was at its worst for me, I created personal self-harm. And that was in the form of depriving, binging, calorie counting, over-exercising, talking to myself really poorly. Specifically after the SA, it got really bad. And it occupied every extra waking moment of my time. And this is the part of the story that is very vulnerable. I've talked about it before, but I just really wish I could go back in time and hug my 19-year-old self and be like, there's a better way. You don't have to do this to yourself. You don't need to self-harm because something really traumatic happened to you that you had absolutely no control over. But unfortunately, those little egos that we have, I think in a lot of ways, sometimes our egos have like this good intention of wanting to keep us safe, and they completely overcompensate. So instead of us being able to look at an experience of trauma and be like, wow, that was awful. I did not like that. I'm going to learn from it, and I'm never going to put myself in that situation again. Okay, cool. I still love myself. Moving on. Our nervous systems totally freak out, and Mine did. I shouldn't say our, mine did. It totally freaked out and completely shut down on itself. And I became such a critic of my own physical form, because that's the thing with SA. Because SA happens to your body, to happen to my body, I ended up creating this narrative inside of me that my body wasn't safe. And because my body wasn't safe, it also wasn't beautiful. And because it wasn't beautiful, I needed to binge and I needed to deprive and I needed to go to the gym for 2 hours a day and I needed to over-exercise. And then I needed to read about diet books all the time. I had to buy every diet book that I could find, and I had to learn how to calorie restrict and stay restricted and not let my hunger get the best of me. And oh my God, my personal energy levels right now, as I tell this story, are just plummeting because it's so sad. It's so heartbreaking. And I know that I am not the only person that went through this. And I know how sad and how hard and how heavy it can be and how trapped we can feel in those compulsions, especially because diet culture is so rampant in our society. And talking about diet culture and having this really weird, disordered mentality towards food is praised and rewarded a lot of the time. It's not cool. It's not a good look. So with all of this, with all of the ego garbage that I had accumulated due to the trauma, due to the culture that I grew up in, due to the inner narrative, due to the narrative of the people around me, it all added up. And I found myself stuck in a body shaming cycle that took all of my precious energy. So if you can imagine that, if you can imagine a person, maybe even yourself, accumulating all of this trash and garbage within their body, within their ego, within all of the inner self-talk, if you could step back from that picture and look at it from above, what do you see? What does this crazy amount of baggage do to a person? It makes them truly believe that they're not enough. They're not enough. And the more that we feed that voice, the louder it gets. So at that point, when I was feeling like I wasn't enough, of course I felt that way, because I was operating from the lowest vibe, most physical, egoic part of myself. My ego at that point had been fueled by a decade of trauma. So her voice was so much louder than my higher self-consciousness. My higher self-consciousness couldn't get a word in because my ego and my body were constantly stealing the airtime in my brain. My inner narrative was so overconsumed with all of this body, diet, dislike of self talking that my higher self had absolutely no room to chime in. The part of me that remembers my true nature and my innate worthiness, it couldn't get a word in edgewise because my ego was so loud. And you know what kept feeding that ego? Every calorie I counted, every time I weighed myself, every fat shaming thought that I had, every behavior that I perpetuated just made her louder. And after a good 7 or 8 years of this gosh darn cycle, this obsessive compulsive, oh my God, I can't even get out of my own brain, I realized that I was either going to drown in this self-destructive behavior, or I was going to have to stop. Those were my only two options. I was like, this is either going to consume me for the rest of my life and I will never get out of it, or I need to stop. Now, I don't know if this would work for other people, but I'm going to tell you what worked for me. I sat down one day and I calculated the amount of time that I had spent obsessing about diet, calories, exercise, weighing myself, measuring myself, reading diet books, planning exercise routines, you name it. Anything that was related to this obsession with my body, this ego conversation, I calculated how much time on a daily basis I was spending doing that. I was spending focused on that. And it ended up being about 4 to 5 hours every day. 4 to 5 hours every day I was spending in this ego loop. And then I added up the time. And at that point, I had spent about 7 years in this loop perpetually. And when I added it all up, I realized that I had spent over a year, 24/7, in this ego loop of shaming my body because of the accumulation of trauma that I had received. Now, I didn't know about the accumulation of trauma at the time. I had not put that together. That was something that came later on. I really thought that it was just disordered eating. It did not occur to me that it was in any way associated with my ego or with the trauma that I had gone through. But that was a massive wake-up call for me, that I had lost a whole year of my life obsessing over something that actually had nothing to do with the thing I was obsessing over. That's something that I've learned massively throughout my own personal experience, is that money almost never has anything to do with money. Business almost never has anything to do with business in regards to the mental blocks and the beliefs. And food very rarely has anything to actually do with food. It all has to do with what we believe about ourselves. We're going to get there in a minute. But in this moment, that was a really huge game changer for me. I value time immensely. I am very well aware that my time on earth in this body and as this physical expression is limited. I'm here for a short ride, and that's it. So the idea of losing an entire year 24/7 to something that was only making me extremely unhappy and insecure was really not okay with me. And so I decided that something really, really, really needed to change. So my first step was actually studying nutrition, not calories, not weight loss, but actual nutrition. I had come to realize that I knew nothing about food. Other than that, food had calories, and calories were quote unquote bad, according to our cultural narrative. Also, I'm sorry that I keep laughing as I'm saying these things. It's just so ridiculous now. And my heart breaks for that version of myself. Again, I want to go back in time and just squeeze her. And I also want to squeeze anybody else who's still currently dealing with this crap, because it's such a waste of time, and it breaks my heart because it's taking away from the energy and the time that we, as divinely and intuitively guided old souls, we as these incredible women could be using this energy that we spend disliking our bodies on so many other things. All of us collectively, like if we collect, so for me, it was a year, right? But if we collectively added up all of the hours that it blows my mind. I'm laughing because the number it has to be astronomical. If we added up all of the hours that were lost of women obsessing over their bodies, and if we took all of that energy and all of that power and all of that focus and turned it somewhere productive and loving and in the flow and connected to higher self-consciousness, where the hell would we be as a society right now? Like, I can't even wrap my head around it. But I'm going to go back to what I was saying before of the steps that I took to break this cycle. So the first step was recognizing the amount of time that I had devoted to this self-destructive behavior and just being completely disgusted by it and being like, I can't, this cannot continue. There's no way. I only have one life to live and I'm not wasting it perpetuating this internal garbage. So the next step was learning about actual nutrition, actually fueling my body instead of feeling like I needed to deprive my body. I flipped the script and I went, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. The focus is no longer on weight loss. The focus is now on learning about the foods that I'm putting in my body. And I'm no longer going to label good foods, bad foods, foods that are okay to eat, foods that are not okay to eat. I'm done with all of that. I just want to learn, what are these nutrients? What are carbs? What are proteins? What are this? What are that? Now, this was just a stepping stone for me, okay? Because it's also really easy to get caught up in, even if you're not calorie counting, then macro counting or whatever it is. I wanted it to be a stop on my journey. And actually learning about the food that I was eating really changed my perspective, because once I understood that foods, all foods, have nutritional value to them, I could start having a lot of gratitude and start having a relationship with the food itself, instead of having a relationship with my perception of the fat and the calories and the sugar and all of this like really toxic thinking about the food I was putting in my body. I switched gears and I started learning about how to nourish my body and also have a relationship with food where I say thank you to the food and I appreciate the food. I appreciate the colors, the textures. I appreciate all of the farmers that had to work in order to cultivate this food, all of the people that this food not passed through, but all the hands of the people that this food has passed through in order to get onto my plate, really appreciating what goes into the creation process of food, the rain, the sun, the nature part of food. And I started to look at food really differently. And as I would eat my food, I would eat slowly and appreciatively, and I would chew, and I would learn to listen to hunger cues within my body, which leads me to the next thing that I did, which is that I worked with a functional medicine doctor to help me restore my gut. My gut had been out of balance the entire time that I had disordered eating issues. I don't know exactly where it came from. I can imagine that part of it was trauma. A lot of it was eating the wrong thing, eating the wrong way. I'm sure the binging didn't help. There were a lot of things that were going on. But once I worked with a functional medicine doctor on learning, she actually took a sample of my digestive tract and was able to tell me what foods to actually avoid and what foods were really, really good for my body. And that really helped me because I was able to give myself permission to eat and also look at food as something that was healing me instead of something that was like bad or negative. Food is very, very healing when you allow it to be. And so as I cultivated this positive relationship with the food that I was putting into my body, I started to create a lot more of a deeper relationship and appreciation of my body itself. I could feel my body healing. Once I learned how to eat intuitively, how to slow down, how to chew my food, how to have appreciation for it, my gut started to heal. And as my gut healed, it felt like my whole body was healing, truly. Now, at the same time that I was doing this physical work with my body and with food, I was also in therapy. I was in coaching. I was taking yoga classes all the time. I was focusing on embodiment. And one of the biggest things that helped me with repairing my relationship with the sexual part of my body was Latin dancing. So that was another thing that I started to incorporate into my routine. Learning how to Latin dance and move my hips and shake my body in a sensual way helped me reclaim my sexuality in a way that nothing else ever has. And that reclamation of that part of myself that was lost during trauma played a huge role in me repairing my relationship with my body. So I know that in this particular episode, I really am focusing a lot on that food relationship, our personal relationship with food, because for me, that was where it showed up the most. But I truly think that all of these things are very intimately connected. I think that our relationship with food, our relationship with our sexuality, our relationship with our ego, our relationship with our trauma, be it physical or otherwise, it all plays a role in the perception of our bodies. And the way that we treat our bodies matters. The treatment of our bodies creates a cycle within our mind. If we can be loving and kind to ourselves and to our bodies, we can be so much more loving and kind when we make a mistake. We could be so much more loving and kind even when we're having a bloaty day. We could be so much more loving and kind to ourselves, the more, like on more levels, when we really cultivate that relationship with our bodies. Because as I said before, our bodies are the most physical part of ourselves. It is the densest part of our energy, in my understanding. And therefore, it is the most intimately connected to our ego. Our ego and our body is where we accumulate trauma as we move through life. So as we learn to integrate that trauma, to integrate the lessons, to call back the parts of ourselves that were chipped away at the point of the traumatic experience, the more that we call all of that back in, the more that we stop ourselves when we notice ourselves in that perpetual cycle, the more that we can repair that relationship with ourselves. So along with dance, for me, it was also yoga. It was a lot of breathing, embodiment exercises, making my body feel safe again. My negative perception of my body was at its worst when my body did not feel safe. The more that I could cultivate safety within my body, the more that I was able to love this sacred vessel that is giving me the opportunity to have an experience as a human for a finite period of time. And finally, I would say that one of the most profound experiences that I had in regards to healing my relationship with my body was traveling. Because when I travel, I'm able to really appreciate the way that this body is the reason that I get to see the sights I get to see, listen to the music that I get to hear, have these sensual experiences in these mountains or in a cold stream or in a bustling city. That opportunity to experience being human in different places allowed me to appreciate all of the incredible sensuality, all of my senses, all of my perceptions. These things would not be available to me if I wasn't having a human experience within a human body. So this reframe of recognizing that, yeah, my ego and my body are BFFs. And when I'm noticing myself being really harsh with my body, I can stop and go, wait a minute, this is actually not about my body. If I find myself getting weird about food, which fortunately has not happened in a really long time, but if it ever happened again, I would go, wait a minute, this is not about food. What is going on with my ego? What is hurting right now? What is wounded? What piece of me needs to be pulled back? What do I need to call back into myself? Do I need to go dance? Do I need to go cry? Do I need to go vent? Do I need to go make an appointment with my therapist? Do I need to go schedule something with my coach? I'm listening to the needs of my ego in those moments because I know that it's not actually about my body, because my body is beautiful and it is perfect. Your body is beautiful and it is perfect. Both of our bodies are allowing us to have this human experience, this beautiful human experience that our souls signed up for. So the moral of the story is that I eventually learned to take all of the energy that was going on with the dislike of my body And I learned to shift it into healing something. I no longer wanted to be part of my own personal destruction. I no longer wanted to add to the trauma that I had experienced. I wanted to take that same amount of energy that I was using to add to my trauma and use it towards my healing instead. And that took catching myself and shifting gears, catching myself and shifting gears, catching myself and shifting gears. I think that, God, what percentage of growth, a massive percentage of growth, just comes from watching our inner narratives and catching ourselves when we are being mean to ourselves or negatively talking to ourselves or negatively talking to other people, or when that chatterbox ego monkey mind is just getting really out of control and going, nope, not today. We're going to go over here instead. We're going to shift into gratitude. We're going to shift into friendly curiosity. We're going to shift into reading a book about psychology. We're going to shift into better understanding our inner minds. We're going to shift into journaling. We're going to shift into talking to a friend, whatever it is that we need for self-care. The only person who can learn to love your body is you. And you can do that by simply catching yourself when you're not being loving towards your body and giving your mind something else to do. That's it. Now, granted, there's a very good chance that you might also need professional help with this. I don't want to oversimplify it. I just wanted to share my own personal experience in the hopes that you, if you are someone who deals with any of this negative self-talk, any of this body negativity, I really hope that something within my story might have struck a chord with you, because there is another side to it. I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is another side to it. And what's beautiful is that not only have I learned to really appreciate food and my body, I've learned how to cook. I've learned how to put so much love into my food, to share moments with my partner surrounding nutrition. And this thing that had at one point been so destructive for me has now become a force of love and light and joy in my life. And as I repaired my relationship with food, I repaired my relationship with my body and with myself. And I really love this body. It's really, really cool. And I hope that we can all get to that point. I think that the more women who can learn to fully love their bodies and the lessons that they have to teach, the more that we can create a more compassionate and loving society. And that's my hope for all of us. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. As I said at the beginning, if you would like to subscribe or join our Facebook group, I would absolutely love that. And I would also love to hear your comments, your feedback. Tell me everything. This was a heavy one for me. I actually feel my energy kind of heavy because I haven't visited that particular part of my memories in a really long time. And because my energy is heavy right now, I'm going to do a little bit of inner teenager work. I'm going to bring her back. I'm going to tell her how much I love her and what a good job she did. Because even though those years were really hard for me, I know that they served a massive purpose in my self-discovery. I know that so much of that difficult inner work, that shadow work, going through all the trauma and all of the ego entanglement, it really served in creating self-awareness for me. And that self-awareness has created such an incredible life after. So yeah, I'm going to give myself some love. And I hope that you give yourself some love today too. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Have a great one. Bye.